going to take roll, but I'm going to skip it. Okay. Picking up where we left off then, or near to where we left off. Open your books to 632. Just 1 second. Bottom of the page. They've made their way to the area in front of Mordor. And Sam overhears this conversation between Gollum and Smeagol. Frodo had slid down to the bottom of the pit that they're sleeping at the top of. And he sees Gollum by him. And Gollum's talking to himself. And we're told that in Gollum's eyes, a pale light and a green light alternate back and forth. And we hear the conversation between Gollum and Smeagol, and we hear, Smeagol promises, yes, my precious, we promise to save our precious, not to, blah, 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 blah. Okay? And Sam's overhearing all this, but he hears then, she might help, she might, yes. No, not that way, no, you know. And Sam's like, what is this all about? Who is the she that Gollum is talking about? All right? So Sam gets Frodo up and such, and they make their way on. We get chapter 3, the Black Gate is closed. And Sam essentially asks, why did you bring us here? I mean, you know the gate is closed. You know there's no way to get through. Sam, page 637. Then what the plague did you bring us here for? Master said so. Master says, bring us to the gates. Good Miss Smeagol does so. Master said so. Wise master. All right? Frodo's like, yeah, I did. Frodo didn't know any better. He didn't know any other place. Okay? So they ask, is there another way? Gollum says yes. They ask, is it guarded? Gollum doesn't want to answer. Finally, he does. Okay? And page 640. Frodo says to Gollum, notice he's not calling him Gollum. He calls him Smeagol. Why? It's his name. He calls him by his real name. He doesn't call him by the sound that he's known by. All right? Frodo says, I'll trust you once more. Okay? But he goes on and says, twice now we've been in your power. You've done me no harm. Nor have you tried to take from me what you once sought. May the third time prove the best. Yes, master, you know. Frodo goes on, but I'm not finished yet. I mean a danger to yourself alone. You swore a promise by what you call the precious. Remember that. It will hold you to it. The ring will hold you to the promise. Okay? Already you're being twisted. You revealed yourself to me just now, foolishly. You said, give it back to Smeagol. You will never get it back. Do not let that thought grow in you. The desire of it may betray you to a bitter end, but you will never get it back. In the last need, Smeagol, I should put on the precious, and the precious mastered you long ago. If I, wearing it, were to command you, you would obey, even if it were to leap from a precipice or to cast yourself into the fire. Okay. A little bit of foreshadowing here on Tolkien's part. Okay. Sam's sitting there going, yeah, right on, you know, Mr. Frodo. Get rid of the dirty SOB kind of a thing. So, Gollum tells them, yes, he knows another way, and says, you know, all ways are marked, or watched, or marked. Okay. Page 643. Frodo asks, finally, I ask you again, is not this secret way guarded? Yes, perhaps. No safe places. All right? So, 664. We're not told what the place's name is by Gollum, all right? But we are told, top of 664, the narrator speaks. Its name was Careth Ungul, a name of dreadful rumor. Maybe Frodo felt it, not knowing it, as he had upon Amon Hen, Even though he believed that Gandalf was gone, he sat upon the ground for a long while, silent, his head bowed, striving to recall all that Gandalf had said to him. But he can't think of anything. Because he and Gandalf, they get to the very borders of Mordor. How were they going to enter Mordor? How were they going to make their way to Orodruin? How were they going to find the Sammath Naur? That's the entrance to the caves, etc. Okay? Frodo's wondering, had Gandalf ever visited there? Didn't think so. And here he was, a little halfling from the Shire, a simple hobbit of the quiet countryside, expected to find a way where the great ones could not go or dared not go. Look at the next line. It was an evil fate. Fate. Like, no matter what Frodo did, he had no choice whatsoever in the matter. And yet, back at the end of the Council of Elrond, I'll take the ring, though I do not know the way. No fate is involved there.
Isn't it 664?
644, sorry. Sorry, 644. Everybody's going, what? Okay? So, it was an evil fate, but he had taken it on himself. In his own sitting room in the far-off spring of another year, so remote now that it was like a chapter in a story of the world's youth, when the trees of silver and gold were still in bloom. This was an evil choice. Choice is quite a bit different than fate. Which way should he choose? That is, Frodo's sitting there, he's at the Black Gate, he has to choose. Do I go knock on the door? Or do I follow Gollum down to this place that is guarded that nobody wants to go to? If both led to terror and death, what good lay in choice? Why choose? If both end in death, why not just sit and wait for death to come? Okay? This isn't the only time we're going to see this kind of choice offered. Not to Frodo, offered to us, the readers, to experience kind of vicariously. Because a little bit later on, there's going to be a scene where Gandalf and a bunch of others are having a meeting, and they're essentially going to be given the same choice. Do we sit and wait for death, or do you go out and find death? Either way, in their understanding, death is coming. Okay? So, the day drew on. What are they doing? They're sitting. They haven't decided. So finally they do decide, and they go on. And Sam sings a song about elephants, and we get to chapter 4 of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit. How is Frodo looking by this point? Haggard. How was he at the beginning of The Lord of the Rings?
Pretty jolly, I guess.
Pretty jolly. And what goes along with being jolly? Fat. Or plump, let's say. Let's not be mean. He was plump. He was well fed. How well fed is he now? What's he been surviving on? Limbus, whey bread. Kind of like Cliff Bars, but, elvish magic. So, But if you've eaten a lot of Cliff Bars before, even elvish whey bread gets tiring after a while. So, Sam comes up with the bright idea of let's send Gollum out to catch a brace of conies, catch a couple of rabbits, and to make some stew. Well, what do you need for stew? You need more than just meat and water, because then you just have boiled meat. Taters, okay, wild onions, Sam says. So he has Gollum go catch the rabbits, and he has Gollum look for taters. But then what else do you need? You put all that in a pot? Fire. Otherwise, you just have cold, raw, bloody meat in water with hard vegetables. Not very tasty. So Sam makes a fire. And Frodo and Sam get captured. Okay. Frodo says he doesn't know where Gollum is. And Frodo asks Faramir, page 658. Bottom of 657, Frodo tells Faramir who they are. And then Frodo's top of 658, he said, we had 7 companions. One we lost at Moria, others we left at Galen above Rauros. 2 of my kin, a dwarf. There was also an elf, 2 men, Aragorn, Boromir. Boromir! Okay. And then Frodo's like, you know who Boromir is. Are you familiar with the little riddle? Faramir, yeah. And are you the half? Yes. What's Isildur's Bane? Not right now. We'll talk about that later. So Faramir says, we need to learn more, so you need to come with us. Farrell says, okay. And we see an ambush. Bottom of 660, top of 661. The Southrons are coming. And Sam sees, bottom of 660, a glimpse of swarthy men in red running down the slope some way off with green-clad warriors leaping after them, hewing them down as they fled. Arrows were thick in the air. Then suddenly, straight over the rim of their sheltering bank, a man fell, crashing through the slender trees nearly on top of them. He came to rest in the fern a few feet away, face downward, green arrow feathers sticking from his neck below a golden collar. His scarlet robes were tattered. His corselet of overlapping brazen plates was rent and hewn. His black plaits of hair, braided with gold, were drenched with blood. His brown hand still clutched the hilt of a broken sword. It was Sam's first view of a battle of men against men, and he did not like it much. Notice our narrator. Sam sees this, and it's almost like his stomach turns. He was glad that he could not see the dead face. He wondered what the man's name was. Okay, now, when Sam wonders what the man's name was, what is he doing to this dead warrior? He's humanizing him. He's not, as Frodo says about Gollum at the beginning, just an enemy and deserves death. He wonders what the man's name was, where he came from, and if he was really evil of heart, or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would not really rather have stayed there in peace. In other words, when Sam sees this guy, he's kind of like, he's no different than I am. He's just like us. He has a family, he has a home, he has loved ones. Why is he here in this battle? Maybe he was lied to. Maybe his leaders promised him something. Okay? And then they see the Oliphants. They get taken to the window on the west. Okay? And Faramir asks Frodo, page 664, towards the bottom of the page, about 2/3 of the way down. He says, you would grieve to learn that Boromir is dead? I would grieve indeed. And then Frodo realizes Boromir's dead. Are you trying to trap me? He goes, no, it's, how did he die? How do you know of it? He said, I hoped you'd be able to tell me. Frodo, he was alive when I left him. Okay. So what's Frodo thinking? What kind of person was Boromir? Not a hard question. Think top level, not deep, sub-level stuff. What kind of person was Boromir? Proud. What else? What did he do for a living? He's a warrior. So if this great warrior is dead, what's Frodo thinking? Everybody else is dead too. Okay? So Sam, who's had enough of Faramir's questions, we're told he plants himself squarely in front of Faramir. So about 3.5 feet tall. Not quite half, a little bit over, half the height of Faramir. And says, "See here, Captain. What are you driving at? Let's come to the point before all the orcs of Mordor come down on us. If you think my master murdered this Boromir, then ran away, you've got no sense. Let's say it and have done. Then let us know what you mean to do about it." It's a pity, folk. Faramir's like, "Quiet, Sam. You don't know what you're saying. You are a simple gardener after all." Okay. And then he tells them Boromir was my brother. Well, like maybe he should have said that earlier. Okay. "Do you remember Odd of Special Mark?" And Frodo mentions the horn. He says, "Yeah, that's right." And so he talks about, Faramir tells them about, he has this vision and he goes out and he sees Boromir on the shores of the Anduin. Okay, broken sword on his knee, all kinds of dead, armor and such about him. So now at least Frodo knows, well, somebody had to put him in the boat. They send him in there. So maybe some people are still alive. Okay. Frodo talks about Goliath. So they keep going on. And page 660, Faramir has told them when he heard the horn blowing, and now Frodo finally said, "If Boromir was then in peril and was slain, I must fear that all my companions perish too." Okay. "Will you not put aside your doubt of me and let me go? I am weary, grief, and afraid. But I have a deed to do or to attempt before I too am slain, and the more need of haste if we two halflings are all that remain of our fellowship." Okay. And then Faramir says, "Okay, but one little problem here, Frodo. Somebody put Boromir in the boat, so not all of your friends are dead, unless the elves came out of Lothlorien, which is is very unlikely." Okay. So, you making their way, and Faramir kind of breaks himself, Frodo, and Sam off from the rest of the group. And he brings up Isildur's Bane, page 669. And Frodo says, "I didn't tell you any lies. I told you all I could." Faramir says, "No, you did well." He says, "And I loved Boromir. But Isildur's Bane, I would hazard Isildur's Bane lay between." Am I close? And Frodo's like, "You're pretty close." All right. Keep talking. Frodo mentions Gandalf, page 670, and that Gandalf fell in Moria. And Faramir's like, "Oh, this can't be good." 671. Faramir tells Frodo that he doesn't need to worry about Isildur's Bane and him, Faramir. "What in truth this thing is, I cannot yet guess, but some heirloom of power and peril it must be. A fell weapon, perchance, devised by the Dark Lord. If it were a thing that gave advantage in battle, I can well believe that Boromir, the proud and fearless, often rash, ever anxious for the victory of Minas Tirith, and glory therein, might desire such a thing and be allured by it. Alas, that ever he went on that errand. I should have been chosen by my father and the elders, but he forward as being the older and the hardier, both true, and he would not be stayed. But fear no more. I would not take this thing if it lay the highway. Not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her. So, using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory, do not wish for such triumphs. For Faramir, the ends do not justify the means." Now, compare what he's just said with what Peter Jackson does in the film. Because he doesn't just take the ring, he takes Frodo and Sam with it and attempts to take them back to Minas Tirith, to present them to his father. Thus doing what to Faramir's character?
Bastardizing.
Bastardizing it, thank you. I love that word. Completely ruining it. Okay? And from what I have read, Lee, Saruman in the films, argued vociferously with Peter Jackson not to do this. Because, as I said before, he has read The Lord of the Rings every year since 1954. I mean, he is a true lover, and he understood what it means to change the character. Yes?
What was the guy's name?
Christopher Lee. Okay? But Peter Jackson didn't care because, he and his wife thought they knew better than Tolkien. Okay? So, I mean, this passage is pretty important. He says, even if I saw it lying on the road, I would not stoop to pick it up. All right? They go on, they keep talking, they make their way to the window on the west. They get ready to eat. They stand, they look out the west, they look towards Numenor, they pause, they don't say anything, they don't say, Hail Mary, they don't say, rub-a-dub-dub, thank God for the grub, let's eat. They just stand there and pause. And he goes, don't you guys do it? No, and we just dig in. Okay? They keep talking. Frodo says some things about Aragorn. And they talk about page 680, Galadriel. Sam's had a little bit of wine to drink. Okay. And he's talking about Perilous and Galadriel. He says, now Boromir. He catches himself. Faramir. Yes, now Boromir, you would say? He took his pearl with him? Yes, sir, begging your pardon. And a fine man as your brother was, if I may say so. But you've been warm on the sit all along. Now I watched Boromir, listened to him from Rivendell all down the road, looking after my master, as you'll understand, not meaning any harm to Boromir. And it's my opinion that in Lorien he first saw clearly what I guessed sooner. What he wanted. From the moment he first saw it, he wanted the enemy's ring. Frodo, Sam, Ixnay on the Ingray, There I go again. He looks at Faramir. Faramir, the enemy's ring. The one ring. Frodo and Sam spring to their stools, set themselves side by side, backs to the wall, fumbling for their sword hilts. They're not quick draws, in other words. So you have two little midgets standing next to Faramir, who could just put his hands out, hold them by the foreheads and keep them far enough away where they could swing their swords all they want and they couldn't hurt them. For Faramir, 681. Alas for Boromir, it was too sore a trial. How you have increased my sorrow, you two strange wanderers from a far country, bearing the peril of men. But you are less judges of men than I of halflings. We are truth speakers, we men of Gondor. We boast seldom, and then perform or die in the attempt. Did Boromir ever say, I will not take the ring? No. You'd never hear him say that, because given the first opportunity, he would take the ring and run. Right? Not if I found it on the highway would I take it, I said. Even if I were such a man as to desire this thing, and even though I knew not clearly what this thing was, he says, still I should take those words as a vow. Your ring is safe with me, Frodo. I will not take it. Okay? But he says, but man, you are a strange little bugger. How did you come about it and everything? So they keep talking. We get the chapter of the Forbidden Pool. Faramir wants to know about Gollum. Frodo says, Gollum used to be a ring bearer. He's like, your story gets even stranger. Okay? So what does Frodo have to do in order for them to catch Gollum? And he has to trick him. Okay? So they overhear Gollum, bottom of 686. Fish, nice fish. White face has vanished, my precious, the last years. Now we can eat fish and peas. No, no, not in peace, precious. Precious is lost. Yes, lost. Dirty hobbits, nasty hobbits. God has left us all, and Precious is gone. Only poor Smeagol all alone. No, Precious. Nasty men, they'll take and steal my precious thieves. We hate them. Fish, nice fish, makes us strong, makes eyes bright, fingers tight. Yes, throttle them, Precious. Throttle them all, yes, throttle them all. Who does the all include? Sam and Frodo. Smeagol. Frodo calls out, fish, nice fish. Smeagol. Smeagol, master's come to look for you. Master is here. Come, Smeagol. Okay. So he calls him again. No, not nice, master. At least poor Smeagol goes with new friends. Oh, poor Smeagol. You know, he's been jilted. Master can wait. Smeagol hasn't finished. So Smeagol comes up, fish in each hand, one in his mouth. Okay. And how does Faramir test Gollum? He looks in his eyes. Okay. Kind of like Galadriel. In other words, as we hear, I think it was earlier, there's something about Faramir that's kind of like Gandalf and like Galadriel. He's got an element of the wise, as it were, to him. So Smeagol looks in Gollum's eyes, and what does he see? There's not immediate treachery, but he says, I don't trust him. I wouldn't follow him. I'd lock him up if I were you. Frodo's like, can't lock him up. If you're going to kill him, you got to kill me too, because I told him I'd protect him. Frodo, like Faramir, is a hobbit of his word. All right? So, when Gollum finally tells them where it is he's taking them, Faramir's like, you don't want to go there. Nobody goes there. But Frodo says, tell me where else to go then. Tell me how else to get in to destroy the ring. Well, Faramir doesn't have the answer to that, so they have to follow Gollum. So, journey to the Crossroads. And they make their way, very last page of the chapter. Now they get to the Crossroads, and the Crossroads, essentially look like that. And Frodo has this image, as it were, this vision. In the very center, four ways met. Behind them lay the road to the Morannon. Before them it ran out again up its long journey south. To their right, the road from old Osgiliath came climbing up, and crossing, passed out eastward into darkness. The fourth way, the road they were to take. Standing there for a moment, filled with dread, Frodo became aware that a light was shining. He saw it glowing on Sam's face beside him. Turning towards it, he saw, beyond an arch of boughs, the road to Osgiliath running almost as straight as a stretched ribbon down, down into the west. That is, into the setting sun, the sun setting over the sea. There, far away, beyond sad Gondor, now overwhelmed in shade, the sun was sinking, finding at last the hem of the great slow-rolling pall of cloud and falling in an ominous fire towards the yet unsullied sea. The brief glow fell upon a huge sitting figure, still and solemn, as the great stone kings of Argonath. So Frodo and Sam are standing here. The sun's like shining down here, and there's a big statue right here. The years had gnawed it, violent hands had maimed it. Its head was gone, in its place was set in mockery a round, rough-hewn stone, rudely painted by savage hands. Upon its knees and mighty chair were idle scrawls mixed with foul symbols, all kinds of Mordor graffiti. And suddenly, caught by the level beam, so the light shining now, Frodo saw the old king's head. It was lying rolled away by the roadside. So here you've got the statue, let's say, and over here is the head of it. Look, Sam, look! The king has got a crown again, because the sun now shines right on the head of this thing. It's a visual eucatastrophe. It's not literary. Okay? That is, it's not something where you can take it apart and pull it. It's meant to give a feeling of hope. And we get this description. The eyes were hollow and the carven beard was broken, but about the high stern forehead there was a coronal of silver and gold. A trailing plant with flowers like small white stars had bound itself across the brows as if in reverence for the fallen king. This is what Frodo sees at first. He sees the head, and around the head is just like a circlet of honeysuckle, let's say. And it's just right around the brow. It's not all over the face. And then, they cannot conquer forever, said Frodo. And then suddenly, the brief glimpse was gone. The sun dipped and vanished, and it's what? Black night. It's not twilight. It's black night. Why is it pitch black? Well, the sky is covered with this cloud. Where's the cloud come from? Out of Mordor. All right? They cannot conquer forever. What does the eucatastrophe show? Tolkien says in the fairy story essay, even in the face of much evidence to the contrary, it denies universal final defeat. This is a way of nature showing, you will not beat me. I will win. Okay? Then we get to the stairs of Careth Ungul. So they start making their way up the stairs. And we find out these are long stairs. This thing goes up and up and up and up and up and up. Every summer, every other summer, when I do my Harry Potter course in London, if my family comes, which they have on some of them, we're kind of weird. We try and find a tower to go climb somewhere. One thing we almost always climb is what's called the Monument in London, which is this tower that's it's either 204 or 304 steps long. And it's to commemorate where the Great Fire of London began in 1666. And it's, you start off, because the tower, goes like this, it narrows at the top. You start off and the steps are fairly wide and thick. But by the time you get to the very top, you have about this much width for people to go up and come down. So you're squeezing by each other, okay? And you have steps about that deep or thick. So you pretty much only get to put your toes on them, all right? And then you get up to the top and the wind's blowing and it's all beautiful and everything. This is the kind of tower, essentially, that they're climbing. It just winds its way up and up and up and up, okay? Page 711, and we're going to have to spend some time here. Hopefully not too much. They stop for a drink, or they stop for a rest. And Sam says, when they're talking about, I wonder if there's water here. I wouldn't trust it. Not till I was dying of thirst. There's a wicked feeling about this place, and the smell, I fancy. You notice it? A queer kind of a smell, stuffy. I don't like it. Frodo, I don't like anything here at all. Step or stone, breath or bone, earth, air, and water all seemed cursed, but so our path is laid. Now, if you remember back when they started the Passage of the Dead Marshes, Frodo asked Gollum a question. Hear my voice echoing down the hall. Frodo asked Gollum a question. How do we shape our path? That is, how do we find our way? What is Frodo now saying? We don't shape our path. Our path is laid for us. Okay? Kind of back to that fate idea. And Sam says, yeah, that's right. What Sam means is, yeah, we're screwed. This is how our path is laid. And we shouldn't be at all if we'd known more about it before we started. Really? Frodo might be there. Sam maybe not. But I suppose it's often that way. The brave things in the old tales and songs, Mr. Frodo, adventures as I used to call them. Okay, now, Sam's going to start into this kind of literary discussion, all right? I suppose it's often that way. The brave things in the old tales and songs. I used to think that they were things the wonderful folk of the stories went out and looked for because they wanted them, because they were exciting and life was a bit dull, a kind of sport, as you might say. You know, kind of like in The Hobbit. Gandalf comes, knocks on his door, I need you for an adventure. Hello. No, we're hobbits. We don't do adventures. We do lunch and dinner and lunch and dinner and lunch and dinner, but we don't do adventures. Go somewhere else. All right? And then the very next morning, he's off running after the dwarves. All right? Sam says, I used to think people went off looking for adventure because life was too dull and boring. Folks seem to have been just landed in them usually. Their paths were laid that way, as you put it. In other words, people were actually just going about their daily business, and the adventures found them. But I expect they had lots of chances, like us, of turning back, only they didn't. Well, when did Frodo and Sam have chances of turning back? They could have turned back at Tom Bombadil's. They could have turned back at Rivendell, but they didn't. They kept going on. They could have turned back to Lothlorien, but they didn't. They kept going on. And if they had, that is, if they had turned back, we shouldn't know, because they'd have been forgotten. If they had turned back, what wouldn't have existed? The stories about the adventures. If those army rangers who scaled the cliffs of Normandy hadn't scaled the cliffs of Normandy, we would know nothing about them. Okay? We hear about those as just went on, and not all to a good end, mind you. That is, we don't only hear the Disney versions, and they all lived happily ever after. No, we do hear some of those that don't end well. Arthur killed by his son. Beowulf killed by a dragon, etc. At least not to what folk inside a story, not outside it, call a good end. Because after all, if you're inside the story, do you want it to end with everybody dying? I mean, if you're inside a story, do you want to be inside, if you're familiar with it, with Hamlet? Not really. Because when the play Hamlet ends, there's a bunch of bodies piled up on the stage. No, if you're inside a play, you want to end up in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where it's all fairies and elves and everybody's happy and people get married and it's nice. Okay? You know, what does he mean? The good end. You know, coming home, finding things all right, though not quite the same, like old Mr. Bilbo. Now, we could jump from here to the very last page, because what happens? Sam rides up the hill on his little pony. He goes up to Bag End. He sees a nice warm glow through the window. Rosie goes and opens the door. She welcomes him in, sits him down in his big easy chair, his Barker lounger, puts little Eleanor on his lap, hands him a mug of beer, puts his feet up on the footrest. And that's how it ends. It ends perfectly for Sam. He gets everything he wanted out of life. Wife, kids, the big house, Yeah, he wishes Mr. Frodo were still around, but, you can't have everything. But that kind of end of the story, aren't always the best tales to hear. Though they may be the best tales to get landed in. Sam lands in the best kind of tale. Frodo lands in the best kind of tale to hear. Frodo doesn't land in the best kind of tale to end. Okay? I wonder what sort of tale we've fallen into. Frodo, I wonder. But I don't know. And that's the way of a real tale. Take anyone that you're fond of. You may know or guess what kind of a tale it is, happy ending, sad ending, but the people in it don't know, and you don't want them to. Well, why not? What if you know that your end is death?
Am I trying to change it or run away?
Yeah. Sam, no sir, of course not. Baron now. You thinking back of the tale that Aragorn told them on Weathertop. Baron now, he never thought he was going to get that Silmaril from the Iron Crown in Thangorodrim. And yet he did. And now is a worse place and a blacker danger than ours. But that's a long tale, of course, and goes on past the happiness and into grief and beyond it. That is, beyond grief, through grief. What? And that Silmaril came to Eärendil. And Sam slaps himself upside the head like he's saying, I could have had a V8, and what? Why, to think of it, we're in the same tale still. Why? Because that glass, that star glass that you have, has the light of the Silmaril in it. That's a visual, physical connection between Frodo and Beren and Luthien. It's going on. Don't the great tales never end? Frodo, no, they never end as tales. But the people in them come and go when their parts ended. Our part will end later or sooner. Why does he say or sooner? What's going on in Frodo's mind? Is he being morbid? He doesn't have a lot of hope. Keep in mind, what is wearing on him? Closer and closer he gets to Mordor. The ring. It's coming home, as it were. Okay? Frodo, no, they don't end as tales. So, Tolkien would say, if we could conjure him and set him down beside us, we're in the same tale. Only thing is, we don't think we live in a tale. We think, well, this is real life. Frodo thought it was real life for him, too. According to how Tolkien constructed the whole Middle-earth saga, we are now in, if I remember correctly, it's like the 6th or 7th age. Okay? But it is the same Middle-earth. Do we see the little people anymore? Not unless we have good eyes. There are people still in Britain who swear up and down on a pile of Bibles that elves are real, that the little people are real. Not that, they dress in green and live under shamrocks and, give you lucky charms at the end of a rainbow or anything like that. But that they truly exist. Our part will end later or sooner. Frodo is starting to think they're going to die before they achieve the quest. Sam, and then we can have some rest and sleep. Real rest, real sleep. And then he goes on and says, and then people will tell the tale of Frodo. Tell us the tale of Frodo. And Frodo's like, no, but if they do, they're going to want to know more about Sam. But you've left out one of the chief characters, Samwise the Stout-Hearted. I want to hear more about Sam, Dad. Why didn't they put in more of his talk, Dad? That's what I like. It makes me laugh. And Frodo wouldn't have got far without Sam, would it? Now, Mr. Frodo, you shouldn't make fun. I was serious, so was I. We're going on a bit too fast. You and I, Sam, are still stuck in the worst places of the story. And it is all too likely that some will say at this point, shut the book now, Dad. We don't want to read anymore. Have you ever had something come up in your life where you've had to do something that is, you've had a big exam, a major exam, or you've had a big something to do at work, and you've just absolutely dreaded it? Okay? What helps you achieve that goal, whatever it is?
Finishing
Okay? That's the achieving it. What helps you do that? Have you ever done this? Imagine once it's completed, seeing it already done, visualizing that it's all in the past. Okay? That's what Frodo's talking about there. We haven't yet gotten to the worst part, and Frodo can't see beyond it. That's why he says, close the book now, Dad. Because in Frodo's mind, how does the book end? Blackness, in despair, in death. Sam, well, maybe. I wouldn't be one to say that. Things done and over and made into part of the great tales are different. Why, even Gollum might be good in a tale. Better than he is to have around you. Where is he, by the way? And I wonder, what does he think he is? Hero or villain? That's a good question. What is Gollum? Okay. And he asks, Gollum, where are you? And they talk about Gollum. Sam's like, he can't be up to any good. Okay. Frodo goes on and talks about, Gollum at least is really trying to keep the precious from the enemy. And so Sam says, well, Mr. Frodo, you take a nap and I'll keep watching. They both fall asleep. And Gollum comes back hours later. This is a key passage. I have no idea if this is in the films because I've never gotten this far in the films. Gollum found them hours later when he returned. And he looks at them. He sees Sam propped against the stone. In his lap lay Frodo's head, drowned deep in sleep. Upon his white forehead lay one of Sam's brown hands, and the other lay softly upon his master's breast. Peace was in both their faces. All right? So Gollum comes up and he sees them. And Sam's got one hand on Frodo's head and the other hand on Frodo's chest. Gollum looked at them. A strange expression passed over his lean, hungry face. The gleam faded from his eyes, and they went dim and gray, old and tired. A spasm of pain seemed to twist him. He turns away. He peers back up the way he came, shaking his head, as if in some interior debate. Then he comes back, and he puts out a trembling hand, and he touches Frodo's knee. But almost the touch was a caress. For a fleeting moment, could one of the sleepers have seen him, they would have thought that they beheld an old, weary hobbit, shrunken by the years that had carried him far beyond his time, beyond friends and kin, and the fields and streams of youth, an old, starved, pitiable thing. What do we see Gollum doing when he reaches out and touches Frodo's knee? He's remembering. AT&T used to have as part of one of their commercials, reach out and touch someone, with this thing. You're not touching anybody with this thing. You're not contacting anybody, because the literal word contact means to touch. All right? Gollum is touching. He's connecting with Frodo and Sam. But what else? Why does he touch Frodo on the knee? Why not on the foot? Why not on the hip? Why not on the elbow? Why specifically does Tolkien use the knee? Here's why. In classical literature, meaning Greek and Latin and even some Germanic literature, biblical literature, you see this all throughout the Old Testament, when someone wants to supplicate another person, when they want to beg, when they want to obtain mercy from somebody else, they either put their hands or their head on that individual's knee, or they clasp them around the knees. Okay? Gollum sees Frodo and Sam, and he sees them at peace, and he puts his hand out almost like he's wanting to be at peace, like he's wanting to be accepted back into the fold of hobbithood. Okay? And what happens? Sam wakes up. Hey, you! What are you up to? Nothing, nothing. Nice, master. Notice Gollum replies softly. He doesn't go, nothing. Nothing, nothing. I dare say. But where have you been to? Sneaking off and sneaking back, you old villain. Okay. This is Sam's immediate response. He sees Gollum. Gollum is gently caressing Frodo's knee. And Sam accuses him of sneaking and of being a villain. Now look at the description of Gollum. Gollum withdrew himself. That has two meanings. It means he physically pulled back. What else does it mean?
Smeagol's gone.
Yeah, Smeagol's gone. That means he internally, he spiritually, if you want, withdraws. No more reaching out and touching the hobbits unless it's throttling them. All right? How do we know? A green glint flickered under his heavy lids. Okay. Whenever the green glint's out, it's Gollum. It's the one you cannot trust at all. Almost spider-like he looked now, crouched back on his bent limbs with his protruding eyes. What has Sam just done? Yes. Yes. Sam pushes Gollum away. Sam turns Smeagol back into permanently Gollum by not showing what? Compassion. Pity. Hey, you! What are you doing sneaking about?
Seems like he forsake his recovery to become something else, or
Sam or Gollum?
Sam forsakes him.
Yeah. Yeah, because Sam, in opposition kind of we saw with Theoden, Sam hasn't experienced recovery the way Theoden does when Gandalf goes and talks to Theoden. Sam will experience recovery. That is, Sam will get what Tolkien says these kinds of stories provide to us, the readers. But it takes him a lot longer. Almost at the end, not of the story, but at the end of the quest to destroy the ring. Okay? Sam is going to see Gollum in light in a little while. All right? So, they go on to Shelob's lair. And what happens? Gollum's little plan works. Shelob attacks. Gollum attacks Sam. 7:26. At last, my precious, we've got him. Yes, the nasty hobbit. We takes this one. She'll get the other. Oh, yes, Shelob will get him. Not Smeagol. He promised he won't hurt Master Gollum. But he's got you, you nasty, filthy little hobbit. And he spits on the And Sam, busts a gut and throws Gollum off. But what happens? Frodo is attacked. Frodo's bitten. Sam kills, injures, whatever, Shelob. And what does he see? Oh, the image from the Mirror of Galadriel. Frodo tied up in a cave. 7:29, Sam thinks of Galadriel. And he hears voices far off, the crying. And suddenly he cries out, Githoniel al Elbereth. Elbereth, she's the wife of Manwë, the goddess, the chief goddess. And so when he cries out, Elbereth Githoniel amino palandiria lenalensi de ungurthos atironin fanuelos, that's like Hail Mary, full of grace, And what happens? Come on, you filth. He goes after Shelob. And he goes and he finds Frodo. What shall I do? Sam asks. Did I come with him for nothing? I have something to do before the end. I must see it through. Well, what? To get him here and then he dies? What can I do? Go on. Leave him? Oh, okay. If I'm going to go on, then I need your star glass, Mr. Frodo. And I need Sting. And I've got to take the ring. But he can't go on. He kneels. He feels Frodo's hand and everything. Page 732. He's still working this out. What? Me, alone, go to the Crock of Doom and all? Me, take the ring from him? Gave it to him. No, it didn't. Not really. I wish I wasn't the last. Gandalf was here. I wish I had pixie dust and I could just fly, to. Why am I left all alone to make up my mind? Interesting question. He says, who am I to put myself... Well, but you haven't put yourself forward. Notice what's going on in Sam. Nice little debate between Sam and Smeagol. Call him what you want. There's something going on here. Okay. So, he takes the ring. He goes. And what does he discover? Oops. Frodo wasn't dead. He was only mostly dead. All they need now is Miracle Max. And so what does he realize? Frodo's not dead, and he's got to try and find him. And Frodo is taken by the enemy, and Sam is left on the other side of the big black door. And we end this book. You're alive in 1955, you now have to wait 6 months to figure out what's going to happen next. And it finally comes out, Return of the King, and you open your shiny book, and you're at Minas Tirith. You don't care about Minas Tirith. You want to know what's going on with Sam and Frodo. But, unless you're like my children, who often would skip ahead in books, what do? You plod on along, because where are we now? We're back with Pippin and Gandalf. We're not even with the most exciting ones. I mean, if it's not Frodo and Sam, let's find out what's going on with Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Merry, and Pippin. But no. So we go to Minas Tirith. And Gandalf warns Pippin, just keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything more than you do. Page 753. He says, be careful of your words, Master Peregrine. Theoden is a kindly old man. Denethor is of another sort. Proud and subtle, a man of far greater lineage and power, though not a king. And Denethor loved Boromir too much, he says. And don't say anything about Aragorn. Pippin, why not? What's wrong with Strider? He meant to come here, didn't he? He'll be arriving soon himself. Anyway, Pippin's just kind of bobbing on along, being a brainless little airhead that he is. Gandalf's like, because it would be a good idea to talk to the steward about the coming king who's going to replace him. Okay? See Master Pippin, top of the next page. I'm instructing you now in the history of Gondor. Though it might have been better if you'd learned something of it when you were still birds nesting, that is, stealing birds' nests, and playing truant in the woods of the Shire. It is scarcely nigh from bringing the news of the death of his heir to a mighty lord to speak overmuch of the coming of one who will, if he comes, claim the kingship. Kingship? Hello? So, they go in and meet Denethor. Denethor looks at Pippin and says, you were there? You were there when my son died? And Pippin says he died to save us. And then what is the fool of a toad? Whips out his sword and says, I know it's small and it's probably not of much good, but if I can be any service to you, here's my sword. I swear fealty to you, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, are you sure? And Gandalf's like, okay. And so Pippin swears the whole 9 yards. And then Pippin experiences this on 757. Gandalf is talking to Denethor and says, so you really want to ask him all kinds of questions when I'm sitting here? And Denethor says, I already know a lot that you have to bring. Denethor looked indeed much more like a great wizard than Gandalf did. More kingly, beautiful, and more powerful. In other words, he has all the right looks. And older. Yet by sense other than sight, Pippin perceived that Gandalf had the greater power and the deeper wisdom and a majesty that was veiled. And he was older. Far older. How much older? Treebeard had said something about wizards, but even then he had not thought of Gandalf as one of them. What was Gandalf? Notice, not who was Gandalf. Frodo doesn't ask Tom Bombadil, what are you? He says, who are you? Pippin's now thinking, Gandalf's not really one of us. And I don't mean by that a hobbit. He means he's not an earth dweller like us. He's a little bit different. In what far time and place did he come into the world, and when would he leave it? And then his musings broke off. Okay. For though the stones, Denethor speaks, as he breaks his gaze away from Gandalf, for though the stones be lost, they say, still the lords of Gondor has keener sight, etc. So then Pippin talks. Talks for a long time. And finally Gandalf says, top of the next page, 758, okay, so you've been listening to him and you don't want to ask me anything? Denethor, if you understand why I'm not asking you, be content. And he talks about pride and folly. And then he finishes and says, unless the king should come again. This is Denethor. Gandalf, unless the king should come again, well, my lord steward, it is your task to keep some kingdom, still against that event which few now look to see. That is, your job is steward. It is your job to maintain the kingdom until the king should return. How long has there not been a king? 3,000 years. Does anybody really think a king is coming back? No. But Gandalf says, even if you don't think a king is coming back, it's your job to maintain the kingdom. In that task, you shall have all the aid that you are pleased to ask for. I will say this. The rule of no realm is mine, neither of Gondor nor any other, great or small. But all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, those are my care. And for my part, I shall not wholly fail of my task, though Gondor should perish. All right? I mean, notice what he's saying. Even if Gondor is in ruins, I will not wholly fail. If anything passes through this night that can still grow fair or bear fruit and flower again in days to come. If Gondor should be totally wiped from the face of Middle Earth and a single daffodil bloom in the morning, I will have succeeded, Gandalf says. All right? For I also am a steward. Did you not know? And turns without even giving Denethor an opportunity to reply and leaves. So what's Gandalf a steward of? The whole kit and caboodle. Everything. Which is why he says, all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, those are my care. All Denethor has to worry about is little old Gondor. Turn back to the map back here, maps back here, and Gandalf says, everything is my care. Well, what does everything include? Yes, even Mordor is part of my care. All right? So don't go talking to me about your, troubles with your puny little kingdom of Gondor, because I've got a much bigger fish to fry than just that. Okay? And they leave. Pippin, are you angry with me, Gandalf? I did the best I could. He says, you did indeed. And goes, what are you thinking of? Swearing allegiance. Okay, but he said it was well done. It touched Denethor's heart. So what happens? Pippin now gets to wear the armory of the House of Gondor. We're going to skip a bunch. He meets Baragon. He meets Baragon's son, Beargill, etc. And in chapter 2, Tolkien leaves Gandalf and Pippin and goes back to Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Merry, and Pippin. So what we saw at the end was fellowship, was the breaking of the fellowship, right? Gandalf, he died. Everybody else, okay, was together. The remaining 8, as far as we knew, 2 Towers opens up. Let's see, Boromir, he dies. And what happens? Merry and Pippin, they go off on one direction. Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn, they go off on another direction. Frodo and Sam, sorry, that'd be 6. Frodo and Sam go off on their direction. They're still going off on their direction. So we see it break up. Return of the King opens, and we still have now, because he's back from the dead, Gandalf and Pippin, they're doing this. Then what's going to happen? Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are going to go off. Merry gets the shaft. He goes off on his own, of the Fellowship, that is, with Theoden. Frodo and, no, not really. Because as far as we know, Frodo's alive, but he's now separate from Sam. And so Sam's off on his own. What can start doing? At this point, rather than go, several chapters dealing with just this, now he's going to start taking these individual threads and start weaving them all back together. He's going to take all these little multiple plots and start tying them all up. Okay? So we get chapter 2, Passing of the Grey Company. And the Riders of the North meet up with Aragorn, page 775. And what does Halbarad do? He brings word from Arwen, or Elrohir. Days are short. If you're in haste, remember the paths of the dead. Aragorn's like, days are going to have to be really short before I take that path. Okay? And then he gives him something that Arwen will. And Aragorn's like, okay, I know what that is. Guess I'll be taking the paths of the dead, because that leads directly to where he needs to go. I'm going to skip a bunch. 777. We see Merry do exactly what Pippin do. He now swears allegiance to Theoden. And 779. Aragorn tells Theoden, I'm going to take the paths of the dead. And Theoden's like, why? Aelmir's, why? We're not going that way. You can go, but we're not following you. Okay? The others say they will follow him. And page 783. Have to spend a little bit of time on it. Aragorn meets up with Éowyn. Notice, back at Edoras in the 2 Towers, Aragorn and Éowyn don't sit around at the table drinking wine and beer and kibitzing back and forth and flirting and dancing like they have in the film. Okay? You have that one scene where they see each other. Now they see each other again. And Aragorn tells her he's got to take the paths of the dead. And she says, is it then your errand to seek death? Middle of 783. For that is all you will find on that road. They don't suffer the living to pass. He says, no, but they will me. Okay. She said, but that's madness. Aragorn, it's not madness. I go on a path appointed. In other words, this path is laid out for me. He can take that path. He's the only one. Those who follow him may. All right? And they keep talking. And she says, why? And he says, because I must. It's the only way that he can have an important part to play in the battle against Sauron. And she's like, okay, I get it. Let me come with you. Okay? I'm weary, page 784. weary of skulking in the hills, wish to face peril and battle. Your duty is with your people. Oh, please. Just what I do not need is another man telling me, a woman, of my duty. Am I not of the house of Eorl, a shield maiden and not a dry nurse? I've waited on faltering feet long enough. Since they falter no longer, it seems, may I not now spend my life as I will? What does she mean, spend? Well, what do you do when you spend money? Use it. Do you retain the money? No, you give it away. So when she's talking about spending her life, she's talking about giving it away. Aragorn, few may do that with honor. Few may spend their life as they will. But as for you, didn't you accept a charge to govern the people until their lord's return? We could go back to the exact place where she does. She did. She is the ruler while Theoden is away. Okay, this is an important point Aragorn wants to impress upon her. If you'd not been chosen, then some marshal or captain would have been chosen, and he could not ride away from his charge, were he weary of it or no. That is, let's say there's an Eobald. And if Eobald had been chosen to rule the people in the place, if Eobald found out that Eomer was going to go right off to some great glorious battle, he couldn't say, "Oh, wait for me." Why? Because his charge was to now stay with the people he was sworn to protect. Shall I always be chosen? Eowyn asks. Shall I always be left behind when the riders depart? To mind the house while they win renown and find food and beds when they return? You see the chip she has on her shoulder here? Why do I always stay behind? Why do I never get to go do great, glorious, martial deeds? Aragorn. Notice how he doesn't attempt to give a straight, direct answer. A time may come soon when none will return. Okay, just think about that for a moment. Then there will be need of valor without renown. There will be need of courage without what? Without anybody telling a story about you later. Which is the most or more valorous or glorious? To perform a deed that other people will then sing songs about, or to perform a deed that will be utterly forgotten? Aragorn's point seems to be, the one that's the more glorious is the one that is forgotten. Talk about humility. Doing something that no one will ever know. For none shall remember the deeds that are done in the last defense of your homes. Yet the deeds will not be less valiant because they are unpraised. And she answers, all your words are but to say you're a woman and your part is in the house. Really? Is that what Aragorn just said? No. But when the men have died in battle and honor, you have leave to be burned in the house, for the men will need it no more. She is the one saying that the house is unimportant if there's not a man in it. It's not what Aragorn is saying. But I am of the house of Eorl, not a serving woman. In other words, it's not my job to serve others. Want a bet? I can ride and wield blade. I do not fear either pain or death. Okay. If you don't fear pain or death, then what is it you do fear? Because you fear something. A cage. To stay behind bars until use and old age accept them. What does she mean? Marriage. That's what she fears. To stay behind until all chance of doing great deeds is gone beyond recall or desire. Until I'm so old that I don't want to go do anything great, noble, and marvelous. And yet you counseled me not to adventure on the road because it's perilous. Ha! Gotcha. She goes, no, I don't want you to throw away your life needlessly. Okay. I would not see a thing that is high and excellent cast away needlessly, nor would I. Stay here. Okay. Now, what's part of Eowyn's problem? Well, other than being stubborn. What does she see when she sees Aragorn? I mean, here's a man. Okay. As we find out later when she gets wounded, Aragorn says, she thinks she loves me, but she doesn't really love me. Because what does she love about Aragorn? She loves the idea of Aragorn. I mean, warrior, future king, like Prince Harry, whatever his name is. Harry and Wills. Wills, he's kind of a loser, but except for when he's out killing, Taliban. Shouldn't say that, but okay. It's like, Kate Middleton marrying Prince Harry. I mean, after all, he's the future king of England. Okay, he may not be Gerard Butler in terms of his looks. What?
You have them mixed up. Harry's not.
Sorry, not Harry. Well, he is if he bumps off his brother. Will, sorry. He looks a little too much like his dad, but, you can't have everything. He's still going to be the king of England. All right? So he says, stay. Stay. So Aragorn goes off to the Paths of the Dead. And what does he do? Why must he take this road? He's got two purposes here. One, unlike Merry, it's a shortcut and he knows the way through. Okay, actually, there's more than two purposes. What's another purpose? What must he do to or for the dead? Free them. Why are they dead but not free? Because they didn't fulfill their vow. They broke their promise. They broke their faith with Aragorn's ancestor. My wife was asking me the other day, because she's been rereading this, she goes, is there an element of, when Aragorn goes through the Paths of the Dead, an element of Christ's harrowing of hell? I said, yeah, because Tolkien's Catholic. What do we have Christ in the harrowing of hell? He goes to free those who are bound in hell. What does Aragorn do? He goes to free the dead from their curse. And what do? They flee before his face, okay, so that when Aragorn and his men get to the Corsairs of Umber, what do they really have to do with the enemy that are on the ships? Nothing. They have to watch them jump into the water because they're fleeing from the ghosts. If it were me, people, water, ghosts, take to the water, okay? That's what they do. That's the other reason why. When he cuts through, he has just made a shortcut so that now he's down here. He's going to sail upriver to surprise the forces of Sauron. So what happens to Merry? Yeah, Aragorn doesn't want to. He wants a midget with him on, the horse through the Paths of the Dead. Merry stays with Theoden. Does Theoden want him with him? No, because he's baggage. So he tells Merry, you stay here with what? The women and children. Okay. Merry's like, always, women and children. Is he really all that adept with the sword? Not really. So someone picks him up. It says, great will should not be denied. Well, who picks him up? Not Eowyn. Dernhelm. Dernhelm. D-E-R-N comes from Old English D-Y-R-N, and it means hidden, secret. Helm means protector. The hidden or secret protector. What did Peter Jackson do in the film?
It was just
She's not hidden. She's not a secret. So that on what day is today? Tuesday? On Thursday, when we come up to this passage, when Durnhelm stands by Theoden's side, when Theoden is underneath Snowmane, and the Nazgul comes down to attack and says, "Thou fool, no living man may hinder me." She goes, "Surprise! You, no living man, look." You know, golden hair waving in the wind. He's like, let's see, was that gender neutral, generic man, or are we talking gender specific man? I need to go back and check the prophecy. Okay. There's a reason why Tolkien does this. Makes her secret, because Tolkien wants to surprise a lot of people. All right, we'll stop there